Disclaimer, I am no relationship expert. Advice for teens and getting over a heartbreak part 2, proactively moving forward. So this is a follow-up video to a video titled Advice for Teens Getting Over Heartbreak, and I think I added a subtitle called Parting Ways or something to that effect. In that video I talked about how teens can get over a heartbreak, so to speak, by surprising themselves at how strong they can be and how strong they can make themselves by doing things like stepping out of their comfort zone, by facing the fear of meeting new people, by trying new habits that maybe they've been putting off for a long time or they didn't know they may be interested in, new books, new material, what have you. Just trying new things to fill in the time that maybe was otherwise spent conversing with, associating with, spending time with a person that's no longer in the picture. I talked a little bit about how, from my point of view, you don't get over heartbreak, you sort of come to terms with it and accept it, and that it might be, at least in part, our own fault, or your own fault, and going to work on it, even if it makes you uncomfortable, even if it means trying things that are outside the comfort zone. So in this video we're going to talk a little bit more about being proactive. Let's say there's been a heartbreak recently, teens split up with their significant other, don't know what to do, don't know how to fill the time. That's fine. Learning to accept and come to terms with a lot of things that maybe we wouldn't have done in hindsight is a big part of growing up, is a big part of accepting who you are, who you've been, and where you want to be in the future. So one of the things that's uncomfortable to ask ourselves, and again this is directed more so at teens going through relationship issues, is ask yourself, are you someone that you would want to be with? And what I mean by that is, you wouldn't want to be with a certain kind of person, and you would want to be with a certain kind of person. We discriminate like hell when it comes to relationships, and that's fine because we have standards and we know what we want for ourselves and what we don't want for ourselves. Even if it's vaguely, we have an idea of what we want for ourselves even at that young age. There's nothing wrong with asking yourself if you are someone that you'd be interested in being with to begin with. Let's say you spend all day long on social media or playing video games or doing nothing in particular. You don't clean up after yourself. You don't do your own laundry. You don't know how to cook. You don't know how to change a tire. You're not a very interesting person, in a matter of speaking. If that's not the kind of person you would want to associate with, or if that's not the kind of person you would want someone you care about to associate with, you got to ask yourself, why is it that someone else would want to associate with you if that's who you are? It's a tough question to ask, because then it means that you have to take responsibility for who you are and for how you present yourself and what kind of vibe you give that is as honest as possible. Because let's say you're doing things for approval. The dangers of putting on a front and getting what you want through falsehood is that sooner or later the lie falls apart. So asking yourself if you're someone who you would want to be with in the first place is not a bad place to start. It's very easy to blame the person who you're no longer with and saying that they were this or they weren't that. It's much harder to ask yourself critically, what is it I did to contribute to the suffering and to contribute to what's really happened here? And that's tough, because that takes responsibility and that takes self-reflection, and it takes realizing things that you may not want to realize. You could blame your teachers for a lot of things, you could blame your peers for a lot of things, you could blame your parents for a lot of things, but until you really sit down and think about what part you played in all this, from my point of view, you're not going to move any closer towards finding a solution and really being happy after the breakup. Another thing I'm going to touch on real quick, but I'm not going to expand on too much. Again, I'm no relationship expert. I want to point out the dangers of rebound relationships. In other words, filling the void of no longer being with somebody by quickly moving somebody else in who, maybe sort of pacifies the emptiness and pacifies loneliness. And I can understand that. Here's another way to put it. Natural law. Natural law states things like, a seed takes as long as it takes to grow, to germinate, and to become what it's going to become, a tree, a plant, a fruit or vegetable. It's going to take as much time as it takes. Relationships are like that. If you don't take the time to really build a foundation on a relationship, and you're maybe 1 month in and already talking love, well, you got to ask yourself, what is it that's really happening here. What you want to consider when talking love is what this person brings to the table for you and what it is you bring to them. In other words, extensionality. It's not obvious to me that rebound relationships are well thought out and that they're, necessarily where a person wants to be. And again, we're talking to teens here. It seems to me that a rebound relationship is more so something to soften the blow and ease the pain rather than where a person really wants to be. I will say if you find yourself in a quick rebound relationship, really ask yourself why. The main focus of this video I want to talk about is proactivity. And I talked about in the first video by stepping out of your comfort zone. And so we're going to talk about proactivity. I'm going to refer to a book called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens, written by Sean Covey. It's based on his father's work of the same title, similarly, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by Dr. Stephen Covey. I spent some time wondering what made people successful, and I found this book very easy to understand and something that I highly recommend teenagers take a look at. Habit 1 is be proactive. The chapter talks a little bit about reactive and proactive. Some of the characteristics of reactive people and reactive thinking. Reactive people are easily offended. And first, let me say, I don't believe that there are two types of people, that some people are proactive and some people are reactive. I think people vary. I think people are flexible. I think we all have a little bit of reactive in us and we all have a little bit of proactive in us. And I think it fluctuates based on our mood, based on the time in our life, based on what we're going through. So I don't believe that people are either proactive or reactive. So you may fit the bill on both ends to a certain degree at certain times, depending on the time frame. Some of the characteristics, according to the book, of reactive people are easily offended. Reactive people blame others for where they are, for the outcomes of their lives, their situations. Reactive people get angry and say things that they later regret. Reactive people whine and complain. Reactive people wait for things to happen to them. Reactive people change only when they have to, when there's a deadline or when there's something pressuring them. And on the other hand, it talks about proactive people and proactive habits. Some proactive habits are not being easily offended, taking responsibility for a person's own choices, thinking before acting, bouncing back when something bad happens to them, always trying to find a way to make something happen for themselves, and focusing on things that they can do something about and not worrying about things that they can't do anything about. One of the things that the book talks about is the circles. Circle of influence versus circle of concern. The circle of concern is things that a person genuinely cares about, like world hunger, like poverty, like inequality, things like that, but things that a person maybe can't do so much about or can't influence directly. Whereas the circle of influence talks about things that a person can more likely do something about, whether it's relationships in their own life or developing new habits, things like that, that a person can actually make a significant amount of change on if they really, put their mind to it. That's something that really should be thought about, because I don't believe that there are proactive and reactive people. I think we fall constantly somewhere in the middle, and we have to kind of check ourselves seriously. Being of the teenage mind, there is a lack of experience, and you really have to be more self-critical because you don't have a whole lot of reference to draw upon, so you have to be extra careful about whether you're being proactive or reactive. The chapter also talks about turning setbacks into triumphs. And what that means is, let's say something really bad happens to you. You can react a whole bunch of ways. You can develop destructive habits like blaming them. In my opinion, that won't do you any good, because really it takes the focus off of what you can do for yourself, and it puts the focus on what someone else may or may not have done to you, which really goes nowhere. Turning a setback into a triumph might be, let me give you some examples of that. You can turn a bad relationship into a work of art. You can turn it into a song. You can turn it into a podcast. You can turn it into an essay. You can turn it into a book. You can turn it into a group discussion. One of the things that's sort of cliche, but it's kind of true, that I believe, is it takes a village. If you're going through something, you don't have to go through it alone. If you find someone else or a group of people who are going through the same thing, it's a lot easier to deal with because number one, you're not alone, and you understand you're not the only one going through it. Number two, it kind of gives you outside perspective, and again, you may not agree with everything that people say that are going through something similar. Circumstances could be very different, but at the same time, it helps to sort of step out of your own shoes and sort of listen to what other people have to offer as far as that similar experience, to see where it is you can draw something valuable from, and they may be able to give you an idea or suggestion, or tell a story that has some experience that you may find valuable that you can apply to your recovery if you're going through a heartbreak. Turning a setback into a triumph takes work, it takes effort, it takes discipline, because you have to, in order to do something constructive, you have to say no to a lot of destructive habits. You have to say no to, excessive TV watching. You have to say no to excessive hanging out with people who aren't really moving you in a direction that you really genuinely want to be going in. Turning a setback into a triumph does take time and effort, and you're going to find that you stumble along the way. You may not reach that point, but at least getting started, getting the ball rolling, it's definitely a step in the right direction, because you may not turn that setback into a triumph overnight. It may take time, but you'll find that if you get there, it'll be worth it. And you'll find that you not only can do that with this situation or a situation like this, but chances are you can do that with something else later on in life that maybe, may derail you from where you thought you should be. Another thing the chapter talks about is having a can-do attitude. Now this is important because a lot of people, no matter what your position, no matter what your age, again, this is advice for teens, but no matter where you are, how old you are, where you're coming from, people are going to tell you can't do something. And one of my favorite things has always been to prove people wrong. When they say you can't do this, you can't do that, and you go and do it, it tells you that you can do things even when there are, a number of voices that are trying to put doubt and fear and insecurity in your head. And it tells you that you're strong enough to handle that. And if you're strong enough to handle that, then there's nothing that can shake you from moving forward and really getting yourself together and becoming the person that you want to be. And eventually maybe attracting somebody who, recognizes that in you and sees that honest self in you, and then maybe wants to spend time with that, maybe wants to get to know more about that honest you. So having a can-do attitude means, for example, saying, I'm not gonna let this thing derail me from what it is I have planned for my future. Even if you don't have a concrete plan for your future, you at least have a general direction where you want to go. And you don't want to spend time obsessing about somebody who did you wrong, or you feel did you wrong, or maybe you did them wrong and you feel guilty about, maybe I could have been better to this person, or it would have worked out if this and that. Your can-do attitude can be very powerful, because it can lead you to believe ultimately that despite this setback, I can do better. I can recognize the pattern of error that led me to where I didn't want to be later on in the future, and prevent something that I don't want to happen from happening again. That's the power of the can-do attitude. I can finish this book. I can, sit and read for 15 minutes at a time, or 20 minutes at a time, or 30 minutes at a time, or I can not binge watch Netflix all day, or I can not spend all day watching YouTube and looking for, things to validate my, victimhood. So anyways, having a can-do attitude is very key when getting over a heartbreak, because what's done is done and you can't change the past. So having a can-do attitude deals specifically with what you're going to do in the future. What is it you want to be, and who is it you want to be, and who would you like to be? I don't mean like what celebrity you'd like to be or what person in your life you'd like to be. I mean, what habits would you want to see yourself adopting in the future if you could paint your ideal future? In other words, do you want to be the kind of person who, works out every day, who cleans their room, who maintains order in their life, who checks up on their friends and maintains healthy relationships? If that's the kind of person you want to be, and you're not striving in that direction, you're not doing anything to address that, then it's never too late to turn that around. If the idea is to get over a heartbreak, whether you're okay with being single for a while, or you want to get into a relationship that's maybe more healthy or productive, you want to be the kind of person that you ideally want to be, and you can start by adopting habits that you would ideally want to have in your life. In other words, if you want to get in better shape, there's nothing stopping you except you. I mean, you may have a physical condition or an injury that prevents you to a certain degree, but you can also find a way around that. You know, I've seen people with broken feet still go to the gym in a walking boot. I've seen people who I was training in martial arts when I pulled my hamstring. When I stupidly pulled my hamstring as a result of improper warm-up, and it didn't stop me from training. It only meant that I had to train a different way. And that to me was a can-do attitude, because I refused to stop training. I refused to let go of what I wanted to do. Instead, I catered, you know, what I wanted to do around my injury, and I continued training until my leg got better and I could do the things that I used to again. So that's something that you can take note of, that if things aren't exactly the way you would like them to be, if you know conditions aren't ideal and you aren't exactly the person that you want to be, well, it doesn't mean that you can't move forward and you can't start adopting in parts these habits that are going to help you move forward past this heartbreak and feeling of, you know, insecurity and feeling of inadequacy and all this negativity that people can be putting in your head. Start chiseling away at the inessentials. You know, you don't need this much TV time. You don't need this much Netflix time. You don't need this much YouTube or social media time. What is it you really would like to see yourself doing, and do it? You're young. You got your whole life ahead of you, and you've got hundreds of people you're going to meet, thousands of people you're going to meet in your lifetime, and who's to say that, you know, you have to meet the right person here and now? The time we're living in now is the age of instant gratification. And again, this doesn't only apply to teenagers, but I'm trying to address the younger minds here. You know, if you're not happy with your past relationships, then make yourself a person worthwhile, that in your eyes is worthwhile, and in your eyes is worth being, and in your eyes is fun to be around. Because if you don't find yourself fun, if you don't find yourself attractive, if you don't find yourself to be the kind of person that other people would want to be around, then chances are other people won't either. So in closing, the proactive mind is more likely to adopt healthier habits, whereas the reactive mind is more likely to adopt destructive habits. And again, I don't believe that people are either proactive or reactive. I think we fluctuate. So if you're a teenager, or if you're someone who has a teenager in your life that you're concerned about, helping them adopt and encouraging them to adopt new habits that might make them a little bit more happy with who they are isn't a bad way to go. Surprise yourself and see where it gets you. That's my 2 cents. Peace.